Hello again. When I was a Jehovah's Witness pioneer back in the late 70s and early 80s, and also an elder in charge of the ministry school, I used to search book stores in downtown Toronto looking for helps that would help me be a better defender of the faith, an apologist, and a better minister of Jehovah's Witnesses. And one of the books I ran into is this one, Wilbur Smith, Therefore Stand. I'd never seen a book of this magnitude on apologetics before, so I took it home. Within a year or so I had devoured it. Came to admire this man, didn't know anything about him at all, but when I left the Watchtower a few years later, I came to know a lot more about him. Wilbur Smith became one of the chief sources of our acquisitions when we went into the bookstore business and when we assembled our library at a CRI support group at first in downtown Toronto and then in Streetsville, Mississauga, Ontario. And Wilbur Smith helped us assemble a pretty comprehensive library of not only Christian materials, Bible studies and theological books, but also other types of books, because he was an omnivorous reader. Didn't have a degree apparently, but got honorary degree or two in his later life because he was a bibliophile, a lover of books. Apparently his personal library, by the time he died and left it to the seminary with which he was affiliated, was something like 25,000 volumes. So Wilbur Smith became a great adjunct to our ministry in the early days of our work in the Toronto area. Wilbur Smith, the minister in his study, I have about 3 more books about his love of books. He wrote about 4 books on the subject of books. And Wilbur Smith, one of the books I discovered through reading Wilbur Smith was this one, The Testimony of 19 Centuries to Jesus of Nazareth, published in 1889 by James Whitmore, not the actor James Whitmore, James Herman Whitmore, 1889. And this book, Smith had told me, was the best collection of quotes about Jesus ever published. So of course I was looking for it, and I found it at the Trinity Library at the University of Toronto. I found this copy for $3. Apparently it's still available in reprint, and I could advocate for its worth, its inspirational worth, as well as its research worth. I thought I'd give you a sample of its contribution. Here's, for instance, what the founding fathers of America, some of them anyway, thought about Jesus of Nazareth. Thomas Jefferson said this about Jesus in his works published in 1871. He's quoted as saying, "To the corruptions of Christianity I am opposed, but not to the genuine precepts of Jesus himself. I am a Christian in the only sense in which he wishes anyone to be, sincerely attracted to his doctrines in preference to all others, ascribing to him every human excellence and believing he never claimed any other." So you can see in these words Jefferson's deistic take on who Jesus is and who Jesus claimed to be. As you've probably heard, the founding fathers of America were not evangelical Christians, but they were theists or deists, meaning they believed in God and thought this about Jesus. So he goes on in a letter to Benjamin Rush in 1803, he says, this is an estimate, we are told by Whitmore, of the merits of the doctrines of Jesus compared with those of others. And of Jesus he said, this is Jefferson quoted, "He corrected the deism of the Jews, confirming them in the belief of one only God, and giving them juster notions of his attributes and government. Second, his moral doctrines relating to kindred and friends were more pure and perfect than those of the most correct of the philosophers, and greatly more so than those of the Jews. And they went far beyond, both in inculcating universal philanthropy, not only to kindred and friends, to neighbors and countrymen, but to all mankind, gathering all into one family under the bonds of love, charity, peace, common wants, and common aids. Third, the precepts of philosophy and of the Hebrew code laid hold of actions only. He, that is Jesus, pushed his scrutiny into the heart of men. He erected his tribunal in the region of the thoughts and had purified the waters at the fountainhead. Fourth, he taught emphatically the doctrine of a future state which was either doubted or disbelieved and wielded it with efficacy as an important incentive, supplementary to the other motives to moral conduct. So Jefferson obviously had a very high estimate of who Jesus was, even if it doesn't meet evangelical standards. Thomas Paine, you may have heard of. He was not one of the founding fathers, but was one of the most influential thinkers of that same age, who wrote the book, The Age of Reason. He was a very cynical critic of Christianity, but of Jesus he said this, and this is from the book, The Age of Reason. Paine says, "Nothing that is here said can apply, even with the most distant disrespect, to the real character of Jesus Christ. He was a virtuous and an amiable man. The morality that he preached and practiced was of the most benevolent kind, and though similar systems of morality had been preached by Confucius and by some of the Greek philosophers many years before, by the Quakers since, and by many good men in all ages, it has not been exceeded by any." So unlike the most famous advocates of unbelief, that is of evangelical doctrines today, unlike the atheist, the new atheist so-called, the most famous doubter of the day, Thomas Paine, did not attack either the person of Jesus or the existence of Jesus. It's one of the most insidious developments of the last 20 years has been this assumption that's out there in the general society now that maybe there was no such person as Jesus of Nazareth after all. In the next video, we'll talk about what the French philosophers of that same period thought about Jesus and whether they doubted the existence of Jesus at all.